another edition of the Energy Week podcast. Ryan Ray alongside the one, the only, the one who can cure climate change and give free energy to the world, Ellen Wald. Ellen, how's it going?
Yeah, I haven't quite cracked the fusion code yet, but when I do, the listeners of this show will be the first to know.
You're not going to break it on Twitter. You're going to break it here. That's good to know.
Promise.
Okay, well, good to be back. And a couple of quick programming notes. We will not be here next week, so we'll be taking off a week. Then we'll come back for the 29th, and then we'll be off the 5th. So 2 out of the next 3 will be off. Then should be back to normal schedule, I guess, until Labor Day. Also, we have on Dr. Dean Foreman today, so we'll be coming on a little bit to discuss the API Monthly Statistical Report, which will come out on July 18th, this Thursday. Okay, Ellen, let's see here. Several things to get into. One thing I don't see, we actually covered on the Texas Oil and Gas podcast this morning, is your article that you put in for Forbes, I think it was, about the impact of the hurricane, or potential impacts, I think it was, of Hurricane Barry. So real quick, I didn't see it in here. We did discuss it some. Our kind of takeaway this morning was it didn't seem like it was Harvey-esque as far as the impacts of what we had with Harvey in Texas a few years ago, but I haven't followed a lot. Mondays are kind of busy for me, so I haven't really followed a lot. Any quick update on the hurricane, any long-lasting effects that we should be watching for?
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't include it mostly because it seemed like the effects were kind of over, at least in terms of the media story. Although one of the interesting things, and I'm planning to ask Dr. Foreman about this when he comes on, is so about over 1 million barrels of oil was shut in from offshore oil platform evacuations and movements. Apparently they can move those things out of the way of hurricanes, which I think is actually really cool that they can actually do that with these giant platforms, or at least some of them. So I'm wondering, there's all eyes are always on the shale industry, but the offshore oil production really bears the brunt of a lot of the weather incidents or the storm incidents in the Gulf of Mexico. And so I wonder how this shut-in, which is 1 million barrels a day for several days, is going to affect the EIA numbers and so on and so forth going through. Because I think a lot of what we see is we don't really see the effects of these storms as they happen. We see it, several weeks out. And so it will be interesting to see what happened with this storm, which didn't really make a huge amount of news in the U.S. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of rain and possibly some flooding, but it doesn't seem like anything was nearly as bad as Harvey or any of that. But it doesn't mean that there were no effects. There were refineries that were shut down or reduced. And we did see a lot of oil production shuttered in the Gulf of Mexico that's just now getting restarted. And so the question is, how long can we expect this to impact the data that we're getting? Because we know that traders make decisions based on what comes out of the EIA. And if, we get oil production well below 12 million barrels a day next week or the week after that, what's really interesting would be when is this going to show up in the data? Because it could lead to people suddenly saying, oh my God, what's happening with the shale industry? When actually nothing's happening with the shale industry. It's chugging along just fine. It's actually just lingering effects of this storm.
No, that's a good point. I guess the one thing I wanted to compare to Harvey was with Harvey, I think Motiva was down, and the initial reports were we weren't sure how long it's going to be down, but we don't have anything like that. So we will have a little blip on the radar here, but there's no lingering things that we're sitting here going at this time that we're aware of, at least, that are like, oh, this could be down 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks. We don't have anything like that out there that I've missed, do we?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything like this. I mean, from what I hear, they were already sending personnel back to the offshore platforms, and there was 1 or 2 refineries, I think, that were evacuated or shut down. Now, one of the interesting things though is the LNG industry, because we've got basically we've got like two big LNG ports. We've got Sabine Pass, and then there's one that was in Cameron, Louisiana. And that was, if you looked at some of the maps as I was following the hurricane on TV, that Cameron was on that map, and it was pretty close to what we're seeing. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we actually see a bigger effect in stoppage or slowage of LNG exports as a result. Now, that's probably not going to affect the price of natural gas, since there's so much natural gas that nothing seems to affect the price of natural gas, at least in the southeast. Northeast is a different issue, but that's mostly because of pipelines.
Okay, well, one thing that could impact the price, it feels like at any time, if it ever gets its act together, is news of oil production. I don't want to say getting back to old levels in Venezuela, but ramping up. And we have seen, I want to say, it was on this show or somewhere else I saw that there was some Venezuela numbers were increasing. Of course, they were so bad, it's kind of hard for them to go down any further. But we have a piece from Argus Venezuela Sanctions Spotlights. Kind of goes over the dates and what all happened, what, when, where. What was your interest in this piece, Ellen?
Yeah, I thought it was a kind of a good idea to kind of take a look back and see, like, what exactly has happened as a result of these sanctions, because as we get the information that comes out of the secondary sources of OPEC, we see that a lot of that Venezuela's oil production actually went up a little bit, and so we hear a lot of news, but exactly what impact have these sanctions had on Venezuela? It's not. I think we're kind of losing sight of it over all of the Iran sanctions, and it's actually having a pretty big impact on, mostly American production or American petrochemical and gasoline production, because the U.S. was such a big importer of Venezuelan oil. And the other issue is it includes secondary sanctions. So they're saying to other countries, if you buy Iranian oil, we are going to sanction you for that. That's not exactly the case with the Venezuela sanctions. Now, there does seem to be a bit of confusion that I've seen recently about whether or not these sanctions, included, because the U.S. has been kind of pressuring other countries not to import Venezuelan oil, but they haven't threatened sanctions. And so it's one thing to say, we'd rather you didn't import that Venezuelan oil, and saying we're going to impose sanctions on you for importing it. And one of the other interesting things that we've seen is that Venezuela has been basically paying Russia or Rosneft or God knows what entities in Russia, I'm not even going to go there, paying them in oil. And that oil winds up in all sorts of places, because you might be like, okay, well, why would Russia want Venezuelan oil? Don't they produce enough of their own oil? Yeah, but they also take that oil and they, send it to other places, and you can make money just transporting oil. And so Venezuelan oil can wind up in places that, people didn't realize they were importing Venezuelan oil, and turns out they are, because it got mixed with Russian oil, or Russia delivered it. You ordered a delivery of this kind of oil from Russia, and suddenly you're getting this Venezuelan stuff. And it just highlights how global of an industry this is, but also how, it's not so easy to track where things are going. And there are definitely a lot of people doing a lot of good work and making a lot more progress than we used to have, but things can seem contradictory. It might seem like, oh, Russia has no need for Venezuelan oil, but, they're still motivated to accept it as payment because they can sell it and make money off of it.
Yeah, and they're a big backer. We've talked about this before. Them and the Chinese are the two biggest backers of Venezuela. So if you can't, if your currency is devalued, like whatever the Venezuelan currency is, I can't remember off the top of my head. But if
Bolivar.
Okay.
I believe it is the Venezuelan Bolivar.
Bolivar. If it's worthless like that is right now, you've got to do something. Oil still has value internationally. You start to look at that and you say, okay, Venezuela's paying the Russians in oil. Who is it that they owe the money to? Is it ConocoPhillips they owe the money to? If you're ConocoPhillips, do you go to the Russians and say, hey, you're getting paid in oil, just give us some of that and we'll call it even?
Or how about you go to the Russians and say, how about some rubles? Not that rubles are that much better, but they're definitely better than bolivars.
Exactly. And I'm looking at the production numbers here. I thought I saw, according to this chart, the production is not up. I thought, this goes to April. Maybe that's what it is. But I thought I saw like last month Venezuela's production was up, or did I dream that?
No, let me look up the latest statistics. Latest data, not statistics, data. Okay, this is from June. So yeah, they have. So this is the Platts numbers. I like the Platts numbers, like Platts guys and girls who work there, men and women. Excuse me, the incredible reporters who we should not should not presume to know their preferred gender affiliation. The people who work at Platts are really great, and they provide us with really great numbers. And if you're not getting them every month, then you should somehow get yourself on that list to get their numbers. Brian can't stop laughing because I'm now so PC. They're going to call me a left-wing propagandist instead of
Yeah. Please delineate who the left wing and who the right wing is.
Anyway, Venezuelan production for June, according to Platts, is measured at 760,000 barrels per day, which is actually a slight increase from May, which was 720,000 barrels per day. Okay, so that's actually like really low.
Yeah, well, maybe I got the wrong headline then. I just thought I saw the other day that I thought I saw that there was a headline saying that their oil production was back up, but maybe.
Well, they technically were up a little bit, but
Right.
I think one of the issues is actually that there is a difference in the numbers. I think I actually like wrote a thing about this a while back, saying like these three different sources have three completely different numbers for Venezuela. Like, what's up, guys? How come you can't get a hold on like how much Venezuela is actually producing? So yeah, let's see. Let's see what they say about Venezuela. They don't really say that much, but yeah, it is up, basically. It's up, not that much. One of the interesting things, I did think I read something about the fact that the big trouble was with their upgraders. So they have these like big upgraders installed that are supposed to make the oil easier to send, to get through the pipelines because it's really thick. And they're like, can't keep the upgraders running and because they have no power. So I think they were saying that they're going to like do something else. I don't remember what that something else is, but I will try to find that because we should kind of follow this story because I feel like it's dropped off of the radar for a lot of people, but it could like suddenly come up. It suddenly be like Venezuela oil output is 0, and everyone will be like, "Where did that come from?" But that's because they're not paying attention.
Well, I'm looking at the historic data going back to the year 2000, according to the EIA, and this it's almost as low as it was in 2003. Of course, that was a slight blip on the radar. That massive drop off in production that they had back then. This has been a nice, slow, steady decline since 2016 into 2015. But you look at their averages. They average just shy, or you could say 2.5 million, just shy of that, for almost over a decade plus. So where they're at today is just a shell of their former selves. And we look at where the prices are. If they were to come back to that level, which again doesn't seem likely, but if they were to get around that 2.4 million barrels a day, it seems like it would almost hurt their case because then the markets would probably get really soft and there wouldn't be a need for it.
That's a very good point.
Speaking of the reason the market's soft, let's talk about China. We've got a couple different pieces here. And it's interesting because I saw the headline in the Wall Street Journal this morning. And this is, I don't know if it's a shared article from CNBC or a similar headline or whatever, but it says China posts its lowest quarterly growth in 27 years as the trade war drags on. Now, we have two other pieces we're going to discuss as well. One is about the June crude oil throughput rises to record on new plants. And the other one is oil prices edge higher on Chinese economic data. So, Ellen, what is going on with China?
What is going on here? Is Chinese economic data bad or good for oil? I think that they can't seem to decide that. I was trying to figure that out this morning, and that's why I basically picked these three articles because maybe we could sort it out. So you always have to take into consideration the fact that they're probably a decent amount of it is not necessarily to be trusted, but let's wade in. So, okay. So what is China? China released its second quarter figures showing its economic growth slowed to 6.2%, the weakest rate in at least 27 years. Now, so this is from April to June, it grew 6.2% from a year ago. That was in line with expectations that Reuters said, but lower than the 6.4 year-on-year growth for the fourth quarter. So it doesn't exactly slow that much. I mean, if we can believe these statistics, just take all of this with like a big asterisk that says, if we can believe anything that China actually says.
Mm-hmm.
So basically it seems like it says but there's a lot that's unknown. So here's someone who says like, are factories shedding workers as their order book falls? Because then that leads to an overall target of saying we want to grow employment. Are they, or are they just continuing to employ people and making less? That would not be surprising. And so Chinese is bad.
So one of the questions I did have for you, and for the listeners, it might be a little botched. They ever had a technical difficulty, but one of the questions I did have is about pricing in general and how the market's responding to pricing. Josh brought up this morning that, they have a hurricane coming in and production stops, as you mentioned, and prices, they come up a little bit, but not a lot. And I was kind of theorizing. I'm curious what your take on this is. Right now, it seems like we still, even though the shale revolution has been going on for some time now, we had the big downturn. It feels like maybe the market isn't really sure at this point how to respond to events like they used to. And we've talked about that some on the show as well. This happened and the price, it used to jump, but it doesn't jump like that anymore. But how much do you think that is where there's kind of maybe a sentiment kind of baked into the price now where people go, you know what? The shale producers, they can't go and drill the price down tomorrow, but they could drill it down pretty close. And so the price doesn't react just because of the potential maybe to catch up to a supply shortage like it used to.
I bet that sounds about right to me. I mean, that would be a really interesting theory to test out and see, because it does seem like that's what we're seeing now. What's also interesting, though, in this data is that it says that even though Chinese economic growth has slowed, their throughput for crude oil is up 7.7% from last year. It says that that's because of the startup of 2 new large refineries. But I also wonder if it's because crude oil prices are so much lower than they were last year this time. I mean, last year we were like almost at 80, and now they're much lower. So, they're processing more.
Didn't we have an article like 2 weeks ago that said that we're doing less? Or did I?
Yeah,
we
did. It said that their margins were down, and so the little refineries, the teapots, were not processing as much. But I think that this is talking about the big national refineries.
Okay. So a slight distinction there.
I think.
Good deal. We'll see in the coming weeks, I suppose.
Yes, exactly. Keep an eye on Chinese production and Chinese economic data, all with a grain of salt.
And once again, we bring on Dr. Dean Foreman, the chief economist at the API, American Petroleum Institute. You can always check their work out at api.org, and you can find his work at the top right-hand by going to Chief Economist and clicking there for all the various things. Dr. Foreman, it is good to have you on again this month, sir. How are you doing?
Doing great. Great to be here. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Ellen.
Okay, let's start off with the executive summary. This, I shouldn't say caught my attention, but I'm curious to see how long we can expect to read this headline. Record U.S. oil production, 12.2 million barrels per day, was sustained despite less drilling. It's the less drilling with the record production. How long can we expect to see that type of headline in these reports, do you think?
It's hard to be precise about it, even if we could predict it. But the thing is, the U.S. Energy Information Administration's outlook, the EIA, in their short-term energy outlook, they've got production growing from now record production of 12.2 million barrels per day for crude oil as of June, growing towards 13 by the end of this year. So this is kind of baked in, and what's happening is we're getting a lot of new pipeline infrastructure out of the Permian Basin, some out of the Bakken Formation up in North Dakota. We're seeing continued growth not only of the existing production, but then a lot of wells that have been drilled but not completed can also come to market now.
So this is that was my main question too is why are we seeing record production with less drilling? And you mentioned that that pipelines coming online along with with DUCs coming online. But the question is, are we going to see more drilling pick up, or more drilling pick up soon? Are we seeing more leases? Are we what's in the future? Because even though I know that the EIA predicts that we might be headed towards 13 million barrels per day, which would be a huge milestone, clearly, that can't be sustained without new wells. So I guess the question is, how long are these DUCs going to last before we do need to see more drilling?
Well, we've done the back calculation to say if you didn't drill another well, how long would the DUCs last? And the answer is more than 6 months. So you really could, without drilling another well, continue to grow production through the end of this year. The thing that's also important, in addition to the infrastructure and these DUCs coming to market, is the fact that productivity trends have continued to improve. So pretty much across the board, if you look at the EIA's drilling productivity report, when you've got a rig drilling a new set of wells in a given month, they're getting more and more each month. So this is both technical and process innovation, but it's a good story in terms of longevity of what we're seeing.
And I remember back in 2015 and 2016 when oil prices were tumbling and everyone was saying no, the shale industry is just going to keep getting more productive. They can be profitable, or they can keep going at low prices, all because of technology. And we now know that that's not really the whole picture, but it does seem like you're saying that technology actually is an important factor now. What would you say to that?
It absolutely is, in terms of being able to target each well real time, the amount of learning real time that happens in the field, the advanced technology that's being applied, the big data tools to target the drilling even better, plus the tying in of just in time in terms of infrastructure and everything else. And just as an object lesson, if you look at the productivity of a new well in the Permian Basin and compare back to 5 years ago, it's a 200% increase. So it really is phenomenal how much more is being gotten out of every existing well, every new well that's coming on stream.
And one of the big stories that we're hearing about now is all the flaring that's going on along with this increased productivity. Is that I think the latest statistic was that they're flaring enough natural gas that we could power, I can't remember the exact number, something like 7,700,000, something like that, homes per day with the amount of flaring that's going on, and that basically anyone who applies for a permit to flare is receiving it. Is there any progress you see on that natural gas front of perhaps capturing this natural gas, or at least reining in the amount of flaring that is going on?
That's a great question, Ellen, and absolutely, yes, it is happening. As we get the new infrastructure, the majority of flaring in the U.S. is happening in the Permian Basin, and there's a fair amount on the Bakken as well. I've seen estimates that say 0.6 billion cubic feet per day out of the Permian and maybe half that out of the Bakken. But as all of this new pipeline capacity is coming on stream for gas, we've got some in the Bakken, but you've got 5 billion cubic feet per day of expanded capacity that's basically under construction and due to be completed by the fourth quarter this year. We're already seeing some of that come. As that happens, that enables there's always going to be some flaring for just safety and operations integrity, right? But as that happens and the infrastructure comes on stream, it's in the company's economic interest to capture that methane and make sure that it goes to market. It is the product itself. And on top of that, things like API the industry as a whole has instituted an environmental partnership. So we're trying to implement best practices and get companies to actively reduce their methane emissions and impose some reporting on top of that.
So once we start capturing all of this natural gas and putting it into our pipeline systems, then the big question is, and I know this has been a topic that we've talked about on the show, is, well, then what do we do with it? And clearly a lot of people want to use it to power, electricity and go to power plants. But as we've been reading about, there's very uneven distribution of natural gas power plants, and some regions are really implementing the infrastructure and the power plants, and some states aren't. But what about the export abilities going on? Are we putting in that infrastructure that we need to really increase our LNG export game?
That is the $20 question. We're seeing a lot of these projects move forward, and we're seeing ones that are queued up as a second wave of them. Frankly, despite low prices, many credible buyers and innovative business models that can go through the whole value chain for liquefied natural gas to be exported from the U.S., record amounts of LNG now flowing to Europe. We've seen a tectonic shift in this last quarter in terms of LNG prices, which normally, compared to U.S. prices, which have been in the $2 to $3 per million BTU range, currently under $2.50, we've seen European prices typically $8 per million BTU and Asian ones above 10. And now everything is $5 or less. We've seen European landed prices for LNG in the $3 to $4 per million BTU range. So
wow.
That low. This is going to stimulate an awful lot of demand. This is part of why people are realizing that the U.S. has more gas than it knows what to do with. The resource estimates have continued to improve. So the key is to have a business model that gives you this ability to monetize that gas. And LNG exports are above and beyond the industrial sector and the potential for growth into electricity generation. The LNG sector globally is really the way of getting the most growth, the biggest bang for the buck, if you will, and frankly, being able to make environmental progress at the same time.
Yeah, one of the questions we're kind of going to do a nice little segue here that we were talking about before you came on was the effect that the tropical storm / hurricane / tropical event Barry is having, or has had, or we will continue to see having on the American oil and gas industry. And we know we're not looking at anything, Harvey-esque, but it did seem like some of the U.S. natural gas ports were really right in the path of this storm. And I was wondering if you could maybe touch on what are some of the effects that we have seen, but also how might we continue to see the effects of this, particularly the shut-in of over 1 million barrels per day of oil production in offshore drilling, how we might see this play out in the data that we will be getting from both the EIA, but also from your statistical report in the future.
No doubt next month, when July data come, we will see some impact of this. And what the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, BSEE, has reported is that you've got, as you said, 1 million barrels per day of oil production capacity in the Gulf, plus 1.2 billion cubic feet per day of natural gas production capacity temporarily shut in. But reasonably, without Katrina or Harvey-like impacts, this is the kind of thing that should be back on stream relatively quickly. And the remarkable thing is whether it's geopolitical concerns in Iran, shutting in of 1 million barrels per day of capacity for oil and this 1.2 billion cubic feet per day for gas, one thing after another, we've seen the market not really get roiled in terms of prices. So we still have, as of June, prices down 10% month on month as a result of just the overwhelmingly strong production. So it is a good problem to have, and it's a reminder that we've got this cushion that domestic production provides for the American economy, for energy security. Consumers can be relatively insulated from, frankly, what 5 years ago would have been really a roller coaster ride in terms of prices and concerns and headlines. Today, it's just another thing. And I think that's a really good object lesson as far as the amount of progress we've made as an industry.
One of the things we talked about a few months back was the impact on the jet fuel with the 737. I think it was this morning, that they're potentially grounding those planes through the end of the year. And I think maybe 2 months ago you had said that it felt like everything had kind of balanced out. Is that still where we're at? We look at jet fuel demand. Is the market kind of figured out, okay, this is how we're going to react now with the mass, grounding of those planes?
Ryan, net, that's about right. I mean, when we look at the jet fuel data, it is pretty much going along with the economy. And it's one of the fuels that's actually, through the first half of the year, up year on year. So it is still showing some growth. That growth could be stronger if we didn't have an impact like that. And when it first happened, when the planes were first grounded, no doubt for that month, we saw a contributing factor to a blip down in the fuel consumption data for jet fuel. But as airlines have come up with other things out of their fleet, grounded those, but replaced with other older aircraft in their fleet, that has continued to happen. So, look, overall, that's been a bit of a nit in terms of the data, and it seems to have smoothed itself out. It's a bigger concern for the airlines themselves of, if this is extended, how do they continue to make that happen? And they may have some more substitution within their fleet. But overall, it's been a strong trend, whereas we've seen some declines year on year for gasoline and diesel fuel. Jet fuel has actually been one of the brightest spots.
And then the other thing I was going to ask about is your economic indicator. We talked about some last month. What can your economic indicator tell us this month?
It's been showing it is more of the same, that is slowing of industrial production for the United States, and it's been signaling that pretty much since we began publishing it last December. And frankly, it's been spot on in terms of the direction that's had. And it's an interesting dichotomy because on one hand, we have relatively strong demand. We have some strong demand growth overall, and the absolute levels are good, but the industrial side of the economy seems to be under some duress. So, for example, we've got some indications this last month that the freight trucking sector is technically in a recession, given multiple different indicators. And frankly, the diesel fuel is also, despite being up year on year in June, through the first half of the year, it's down fractionally. So watch this space. We'll see what happens. But the U.S. economy has continued to be relatively strong compared with those others globally, from Europe to Asia.
Now, between this time that you were on and last time that you're on, President Trump has talked a lot about China. It feels like maybe we're heading in the right direction. I know you guys can't make predictions and things like that, but let's just presume, for instance, that after this podcast is over, President Trump comes out, the trade war is over. What might be some things we should look for over the next month if the deal does get done relatively soon?
Well, the first thing is, if a deal gets done, I would look for some sort of rally in the financial markets because a major cloud will have been cleared. And on top of that, you've probably see a resumption of global trade flows, though this has been sporadic. This is kind of buried in the data, where one of the nuggets, if you will, in this month's report is that the Baltic Dry Shipping Index, this marine freight shipping index, it went up 20% in June, and it's up by another third so far in July. So at the same time as you're looking at headlines based on a month or two ago data saying, oh, global trade's under duress, and you got a headline this morning saying China's economic growth is at a 27-year low, here you have this resounding boom suddenly in a spurt in terms of marine shipping. Well, why is that? This is the time of year when a lot of goods that would be shipped out of China that would start to come for holiday season, so that you have inventory stocking through the latter half of the year. And those things are through the value chain and through the retail system in the United States come the holiday season. This is when it takes off. And there's also another round of tariffs to be applied by the U.S. to imports from China. And there's some effort to try to beat that. So the fourth round of that, if you will, could be beat a little bit if the goods come in now. So there's some acceleration that we're seeing. And these are sort of the backstory that goes with the excitement around, will they or won't they, and will the clouds clear? If the clouds clear, I think it's a good thing. If it doesn't, we're also looking at all the myriad impacts that the tariff war has had so far. $75 billion a month in terms of revenues coming into the federal government, tariff revenues as a whole. A large part of that's coming from China. The government's going to get used to that. So even if the clouds don't clear, net, the story of is it gloom and doom for consumers when, if we look year over year, for example, the Chinese currency, it has depreciated, or they have depreciated their currency about 3% versus the US dollar. So not all of this is landing on US consumers' backs as you see the tariffs get imposed. It does vary by sector. And when you've got, for example, 3/4 of all toys in the United States that are imported, that's of all toys, 3/4 are coming from China. There is kind of a holiday Grinch aspect to a lot of the things, from textiles to shoes, that are coming from China that will matter a lot at the end.
I love nuggets like this because that's not what we would expect in July. People are just not thinking about the holiday rush, but some people are thinking about the holiday rush, and the fact that it's showing up in the shipping data right now is really interesting. Of course, apparently there's now this new thing where we have Black Friday not on Friday and in July, and I'm not really sure what's going on with that, but consumers, your holiday goods are heading towards the United States now to beat the tariffs.
You got it. Creative marketing.
No, that's the way to do it. One quick question, and your report might not be the right format to handle this, but I'm just curious of your insight. Ellen and I were talking earlier about, and we talked extensively about Venezuela and China and Russia, and one of the things we said is not we reported, but following up on other people's reporting is that Venezuela is really backed by China and Russia. One would presume that a trade deal with China would have some implications for Venezuela. We're looking at their oil output earlier, and just how low it's almost down to 2003 levels. Can we reasonably expect anything or have anything to look for on the Venezuelan front if there is a deal with China? Could that maybe spur on some Venezuela drilling because China might feel better about backing them a little bit more? The U.S. might ease off of them, or any insight on any of that?
This one kind of hits close to home in the sense that I follow Venezuela a fair amount, and it's still a story where it appears it would get worse before it gets better. Okay. Also difficult to predict the timing, but in terms of continued decline, the sanctions that are imposed upon them, that makes it really difficult to get out of that hole, even if a trade deal is cut. You're right that there is a lot of explicit support, both from Russia, from China, from Hezbollah, from various sources.
Hezbollah impacting our economic data.
Well, taking a military presence inside of Venezuela, that makes it a challenge. So this is, I think, part of the calculus of why to use economic tools to try to sort this out and see if it can come to a better outcome and a more democratic outcome in the long run. But it's not there now.
Okay. Well, Dr. Foreman, Ellen, do you have anything else?
I think we've just about covered it. Do you have anything else you wanna add for the listeners?
No, this is great. And as you, Ryan, started at the outset, available on our website at api.org. We've got this report, our quarterly report, always available.
Yes, api.org. We'll link to that in the show notes. Chief Economist there. They have all the reports, the past reports, current reports. You can track all that. You can sign up to get them delivered to your inbox. This comes out on Thursday. We're recording this on Monday. It's released on Tuesday. If that makes sense, it will still be a day or two by the time this comes out before it's released. Dr. Foreman, it was so great to have you on. Next month, any teasers or tidbits that we might be looking for as we look at the August report?
Hard to say. I think you hinted on the seasonal impact of the weather patterns and what that has. So that's going to muck with the data. We'll have to see if this tariff thing sorts itself out. And frankly, as we get toward the end of the summer driving season, we'll get a real year-on-year comparison to see exactly how strong some of the underlying strength is in the fuel consumption data domestically.
Okay, well, Dr. Foreman, thank you so much, and we look forward to talking to you again next month, sir.
Awesome. Ryan, Ellen, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, and once again, thanks to Dr. Foreman, and again to the listeners. We had some technical difficulty. The internet cut out while we record, so you might have a splotch there in the middle of it. Nate will probably do his best to clean it up. But Ellen was waxing poetically about China And so if we missed any of that, I'm sure we'll cover China again in a future podcast sometime before the end of the year or the end of the quarter, something like that.
Yeah.
So.
And really, you shouldn't listen to me about China. You should listen to Dr. Foreman because he really explained, I think, a lot about what's going on and the effects of these China issues. So listen to him, not me.
Well, one thing I was going to ask, and I got derailed, most of the internet stuff is he mentioned that the diesel market is kind of soft. And he also mentioned that the transportation market, I believe he said the truck transportation is kind of in a recession. And I got to think about it. I said, well, I didn't because I got distracted, but I was just thinking, with all of the oil and gas works going on, all of the diesel is being poured into the industry. It's still not enough to offset all the little Amazon truck deliveries and food deliveries and all that stuff, I guess, is just makes up such a large portion. I'm sure there's other parts of the market, maybe ships or whatever. But I just found it interesting that segment of the industry is in a recession. And final tidbit, Ellen, where I live at least one gas station, I think two, the diesel is actually cheaper than the gasoline.
Wow. See, now that's an interesting thing. I do think we also have to remember that the agriculture market, the agriculture industry, is a big consumer of diesel fuel, and they're just way depressed because of those floods. And that may be affecting it. Plus, in my neighborhood, Amazon makes its deliveries in like little U-Haul vans. So
you know what? That's an interesting thing to track because now that they have their new Go Further or whatever it is, I wonder how much is transitioned from maybe historically big vehicles to cars or little vans that run off of gas. That could be something that could impact the prices. But next week, or not next week, next month we get him on. If the diesel prices are low, I will ask him about that. Or sometimes he listens to the show. Maybe we'll email him an answer and we can read it on the podcast. Ellen, where will you be this week?
I am going to be on Forbes and on investing.com. And you know what? I will also link to Dr. Foreman mentioned, I think after he was going about, I wrote a piece about the connection between the dollar and oil prices. I will link to that in the show notes because that's kind of gaining steam there on Forbes, my piece about that. So, and I'll be on Twitter.
Editor's pick? Oh, you'd be on Twitter.
That's a good question. I don't know if it was an editor's pick. I don't think so. I haven't been doing so great in the editor's picks. If my editor listens to this, I'd like you to pick me.
100% of the podcast hosts on Energy Week podcast voted for Ellen to be picked.
So yeah, and then I will be on Twitter, and then I'll probably be a little sparse on Twitter because I'm heading out of the country, and I'm hoping to not be on the internet so much, but to be taking in the amazing sights and sounds and experiences around me.
Oh, well, good. We'll have a good trip. We will be off again next week. We'll be back the week after, then off again. So EnergyWeekPodcast.com is the website. Ellen will be there. Texas Gas Podcast, Oil and Gas Contractors Connect, and my new show, Bring in the Closers with Ben Samuels about oil and gas deals, how we do them. Supposed to go out last week, but I got to throw Ben on the bus. He's been delaying it with some artwork. So hopefully that will come out this week. It'll be on LinkedIn. You can connect with me there. Thank you, listeners, and we will talk to you next week.